Let's begin. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this we want to pick up from where we left off last week. And if you recall, I drew a triangle, God being here, and the world, and me, as a Christian. And so we look at them. The second son. He went out and he lived in the world, and then he came back. Now we're going to look at the first son. Now, the first son, the older one, the older son, he never left home and he never went into the world, but he stayed. So you can say that he is very faithful. I want to talk about a relationship today. What is my relationship to God? Right? If I do have a relationship, then what is my relationship between God and me? So let's read from verse 21. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened cow and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Let's pause there for a moment here. He was lost and is found. If you remember, Zacchaeus, Jesus went to Zacchaeus' home. He was a tax collector. And when he went home and the people were complaining, the outsiders, they said, oh, he went into the sinner's home. But this man, after spending time with Jesus, he says, if I owe somebody, I will pay back fivefold. And then Jesus said this in response to people complaining about Jesus being with the tax collector. He said, the Son of Man, or he's talking about himself, Son of Man came to seek and to save. Seek and to save what was lost. So that's in Luke, and this is a kind of a theme of Luke, where Jesus Christ's mission is to go out. He left his home, came into this world to seek those who are lost. Because if you are lost, you can never find your way back home. That's why you're lost. So it has to be God has to take that initiative. A sinner can never turn back to God. Because if he is lost, how can he find his way home? So this is the reason why Jesus said, I came to seek, to find, because I'm not lost, but you're lost. So it's much easier for someone who's lost to wait for someone to come and rescue. That's what it is. So what we have here is basically something slightly different. Got lost, shepherd goes out, seeking that sheep and finding that sheep and bring that sheep back. That's not what's happening here. Or the coin that was lost in the house, right? And the woman was looking for that coin and finally found that coin. But here, it was not that the father went out and looked for his son. Father was waiting. So people probably have thought, maybe he doesn't really care about his second son who left, who went out. Right? Why doesn't he go out and get this son? Isn't that how we actually feel about this God? Because the parable here is looking at from man's perspective, human perspective. When we see this, we feel like God is not doing anything. Right? Why can't he just come to this rescue? Meanwhile, the older son, verse 25, in the field, when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, what was going on? And then one of the servants replied, your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has come back safe and sound. I want you to think about that word, safe and sound. In original, in translation, that one word, it can be described as healthy. It can be described as pure. It can be described as sound doctrine, right doctrine. So his son came back pure. What do you think about that? You're talking about a son who went out, who left home. He spent all his money and he was working, tending the fig. Did he look pure? Did he look perfect? No. But notice here, his servant says, he has come back safe and sound. It really doesn't make sense. What it means is he came back. He came back in safety. He came back in purity. He came back in health. He came back healthy. And he lost everything. He probably didn't even get a haircut. He probably didn't even shave, right? And his clothes, I'm sure, all worn out, and he was probably smelly and dirty, right? But why does the Bible use the word safe and sound or pure? This is the question. Something very similar story took place in the Old Testament. He realized that David wanted to see his son, Absalom. So Joab hired a woman and told the story, and then finally told the king, and the king says, he can come back. So Absalom came back. But guess what he said, if you remember? He can come back, but he will never see my face again. You could come back to Jerusalem, but you're not allowed to come into my presence. Because David, as much as he loved Absalom, but then when he thinks about what he had done, killed his own brother, took that revenge, he couldn't accept it. So for David, Absalom was still a what? A sinner. Having that story in mind, now let's look at this story. Unlike David, when this son who squandered everything that he had and lived in debauchery and completely living in this so-called sinful life, all dirty and all that, came back, and the father looks at him. He didn't say, you could come back, but you're not going to see my face. Don't you ever be in my presence. He didn't do that. He saw him as what? Pure. Perfect. Sound. That tells us about who God is. When a sinner, when he comes back to God, God doesn't look at him as a sinner. He doesn't look at him and say, okay, let's see how you will do. I'm going to wait until 1 year, see how you do. And then maybe I'll think about you with treating you as my son. God doesn't do that. Because of Jesus Christ, he accepts us not as a sinner, but as a pure, righteous person. And that's what we see here. That's what the parable is about. But we don't see other people the way God sees them. We see them still a sinner. Oh, I know that person. I know how that person used to live. It's very hard for us to accept. As a matter of fact, if you recall, Paul, before he was converted, he was persecuting the Christians. And then when he came to know Jesus Christ, and when he became Christian, the church was afraid to what? Accept him. Because they were still looking at him as a Paul the persecutor. This happens all the time. So therefore, here is this older brother. He couldn't understand. Why does my father accept him as safe and sound? Couldn't understand that. Couldn't understand. The Pharisees could not understand, why does this rabbi, he spent time with these sinners as though they never committed sin. But isn't that how God treats us? God does not hold our past sin against us. God doesn't do that. And that's what we find here. So read verse 28. Now older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. Oh, verse 31. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Two verses that I want to focus today. Here's the second son. He said, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy hired servants. This is not even a servant living in home, but we're talking about hired worker. So let's look at it here. What is interesting here, is this. The relationship, as we consider the relationship, there are two types of relationship. You have son, his identity is son, and you have the father. And the question that you and I have to ask this afternoon is this: what is the relationship between me and the Father? Here, the second son, realizing he is unworthy to be called his son. So I'm unworthy. And that's true. He is unworthy. So, what is his relationship? It's more of employed, and employer, boss, master, right? Worker.
Someone?
Yeah, servant. You know what I mean? This is what he feels. This is what he feels. And this is what he feels, that he is I'm unworthy to be called your son. Please hire me as one of your employees. Right? Now you have, that's in verse 19. Now you go to verse 29. What about verse 29? But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. So how does he see himself? He sees himself as father, as what? Boss, master, and he sees himself as servant. Isn't that interesting? So what we have here is this. This person went out to the world and came back, and he feels unworthy. This person, the older son, he never disobeyed his father. He never went out to the world. But then, his relationship with the father was not the father and son relationship, but his relationship with the father was boss, master, and the servant relationship. So what we have here is humility. Here is anger, unhappy. So what we find here is that there are more people who are unhappy in the church than the outside of the church. It's possible. You can be unhappy and dissatisfied because of your relationship with God. It's not a father and son relationship. Then how do we experience this true happiness It is not in my religious zeal. It is not in my so-called faithfulness to God. But the true joy comes in the relationship, not as a mean boss and as an employee, but as the Father who is gracious and loving, and I am his son. That's where the joy is. So, notice here, verse 31. Verse 31, he says, my son, the father said, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours. He never appreciated the fact that he was with the Father. He never appreciated all the wealth that belongs to him. But why do you live as though you're simply a worthless, hired worker? Never appreciate, never get to enjoy, never get to appreciate. So the question that you and I have to ask this afternoon is, what is my relationship with this God? Is it employer and employee relationship? Or is it father and son relationship? The reason why that I cannot rejoice with the Father is because our God is a God of grace. He accepts us not based on our work, but he accepts us because of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross. He receives us not as a sinner, but as a perfect, righteous person. Maybe we haven't fully grasped that, the fact that how God sees us in Christ Jesus our Lord. Maybe that's why we cannot rejoice. Maybe that's why when a sinner comes back to God, we can't rejoice with God.